Hello all, my name is Spencer Shellhace and this is my Reteach It project for FAS264. Today I'm going to be discussing about how hegemonic masculinity harms our youth today. Alright, so to start us off, I want to discuss how boys are typically raised to avoid femininity. To do this, I want to show you a study conducted by Emily Kane. Emily Kane is a professor of sociology at Bates College and the author of No Way My Boys Are Going to Be Like That: Parents' Responses to Children's Gender Nonconformity. In this research paper, she interviewed 50 sets of parents from all different backgrounds to gauge their responses, positive or negative, regarding their children's performance of gender. She found that 23 of 31 parents of sons mentioned negative reactions to items, activities, or attributes commonly referred to as feminine. Some quotes from parents in this research paper include statements that back this idea up. A white heterosexual father said this about his son: "I don't want him to be a sissy. I want to see him strong, proud, and not crying like a sissy." Another father even stated, "Sometimes I get so annoyed, He comes crying, and I say, 'You're not hurt. You don't even know what hurt is yet.'" Moving toward the textbook, we see avoiding femininity in our words as well. In page 130 of the course textbook, it discusses how, in contemporary American English, synonyms for power include male, manlike, manly, and masculine, while synonyms for weakness include effeminate, emasculate, and womanly. Gendered terms like man up and grow a pair also factor into this. In other words, gender in our speech is a metaphor for power, with these masculine terms perceived as strong, while these feminine terms describe the weak. I want to take the time to define some key terms you're going to see throughout this video. The term male flight refers to a phenomenon where men actively avoid activities and traits that are viewed as feminine. The term hegemonic masculinity refers to a type of masculine performance that works to justify and naturalize gender inequality. Because most boys are taught by their parents and our subconscious definitions of gendered words to avoid feminine traits throughout their childhood, they come to idealize the idea of the perfect men. While being strong, successful, rich, and charismatic is not a bad thing to strive for, it's not realistic for most men to achieve. So let's take a second to look back on a historical movement called the Men's Liberation Front. Following the success of the women's suffrage movement of the 60s, some men created the Men's Liberation Movement. In a research paper titled Forks in the Road of Men's Gender Politics: Men's Rights versus Feminist Allies by Michael A. Messner, he discusses the creation of this movement. This movement almost had a "what about us" vibe, arguing that men were also oppressed with women for financial and lost family time reasons. This movement was meant to run alongside the women's movement and not rival it. However, as Messner writes, following the fissuring of men's liberation, the men's rights movement continued to deploy a narrowly conservative language of sex roles, which leads us to an interesting fact that I found in my research. Anytime a women's rights movement gains traction, a men's rights group is created which eventually devolves into rivaling or working against women and their rights. So in modern day, how is men's need to be masculine taken advantage of, like the men's rights movements of the past? One prime example is the success of someone like Andrew Tate. Formerly a professional kickboxer, he blew up on YouTube posting videos on how to get rich quick and how to focus on being masculine. Being rich, athletic, strong, and advertising himself as a woman savant, he fits the image of the ideal or perfect man young boys are taught to strive for. One teacher, when asked how Tate affected her students, said, "I have boys who refuse to speak to me and speak to a male teaching assistant instead because I am a woman." Andrew Tate brought forth the idea of the manosphere, a version of hegemonic masculinity where men believe the most important things a man needs is money and power over women. As we saw in the Messner example, historically, men's rights activists usually gain traction when they can create discourse against an existing women's rights group. Starting in 2016, large political content creators on the internet figured out they could make millions going against the progressive movement of the early to mid 2010s. Demonizing social justice warriors, along with other progressive groups, they actively preyed on men who lacked the attributes of the perfect man. These men with fragile masculinity became the perfect targets for these grifters to influence. As more of these political content creators became internet famous, a pipeline towards alt-right ideas was born. These are the men you now see falling into misogynistic, anti-feminist, and white nationalist groups. So what are the results of all of this happening? As these men continually watched these alt-right creators, they became stuck in an echo chamber where most of the things they saw online were a regurgitation of these same ideas. Some of these men eventually ended up on forums such as 4chan or 9gag, where bad actors encouraged crime and harm to the marginalized groups they specifically opposed. Debbie Ging, author of Alphas, Betas, and Incels, Theorizing the Masculinities of the Manosphere, wrote, contributors to these boards appeared to be using social media to organize a campaign of revenge against women, social justice warriors, and alpha males who deprived them of their success. Let's ask ourselves, what are some conclusions we can come to from this presentation? We know that children are taught from a young age that gender is power, with masculine traits being strong and feminine traits being considered weak. When boys reach their teenage years, they fall into hegemonic masculinity, trying to fit in with their peers. If they never escape this thought process, they can be influenced by political bad actors through social media and other online forums. If they never escape this pipeline, they risk falling into radicalized groups and forums. The people who are in these pipelines can cause tremendous harm to marginalized groups and encourage mentally unwell people to do awful things to the people they hate. So how can we fight against this? We need to fight against our children falling for hegemonic masculinity. We need to embrace our children's interests regardless if they are masculine or feminine. We need to teach our children how to not fall into misinformation traps and echo chambers online. And finally, we need to educate everyone on the dangers of these online forums and the havoc they can cause. Here are some questions for the discussion board. I'll take a second so you can pause. And here are the citations I used in the makings of this presentation. And finally, thanks so much for watching my presentation. I hope you guys have a great day.